unsolved mysteries. I've been doing a lot of solved ones over on Patreon, so I thought that it was your turn for one. We are going to talk about Leslie Prior today. Leslie was born October 5th, 1952, into a loving and caring household of her father, William Jennings Jr., and her mother, Miriam Bullen Jennings, in Rhode Island. As Leslie was growing up, she was supported by her family and encouraged to pursue her dreams. After completing her education, she tied the knot with the love of her life, a man named Carl Eugene Prior III. Now, Carl went by Sandy, and I'm not sure why, but I may refer to him as Sandy as the video goes along, so don't get confused. The two of them were married on October 26th, 1974, in a beautiful venue in Florida, surrounded by their loved ones. In the following years, they welcomed their daughter, Lauren, which made their bond stronger than ever. Leslie was a devoted wife and mother, and they moved into a house in the 4800 block of Drummond Avenue in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Now, the first sign of trouble at the house on Drummond Avenue was in May of 2001 when Leslie failed to show up for work. Her employer started to call members of her family when she couldn't reach Leslie, which included Sandy and her daughter, Lauren. Around 11:30 in the morning, this employer and Carl went to the house to see if something had happened to Leslie, and they found what they described as a suspicious scene. There was blood spatter and smeared blood on the walls near the front door. They discovered dried blood on the corner by the front door and a puddle of water on the floor. As they looked a little bit further, they discovered that there was a corner table that had been knocked over and a blood-stained rug on the floor. It usually was in the foyer, but it had been moved into the living room. At this point, they could not immediately spot Leslie, so they called 911, and the 911 operator tells them to go outside and wait for the police, which they did. So when the authorities arrive, they search the house and they find Leslie upstairs, deceased in the house's bathroom shower. Detectives found traces of blood on the walls. They found male DNA samples, and several pieces of furniture had been toppled over. The medical examiner listed Leslie's cause of death as multiple blunt force traumas and strangulation. As they conducted her autopsy, they found blood under her fingernails and bruising on her arms, which indicated she had fought back against her attacker. This man's blood was found in the dining room, in the hallway, and on the kitchen floor leading to the backyard. Leslie's injuries were consistent with strangulation and her head from being battered on the foyer floor. Some of the blunt force trauma to her head was V-shaped, kind of consistent with the sharp corners of the molding. I was going to say crown molding, but it's not crown molding. It's not the chair rail either. You know, the stuff that goes around the carpet. My brain. And they had this in the foyer and in the front door area of their house. she was found in the shower of the primary bathroom. Investigators believe that whoever had done this to her had carried her from the foyer so that he could try to clean up the blood and prevent further spatter in the house. Whoever had done this also tried to clean up the crime scene based on the luminol testing that revealed additional evidence of blood in the foyer, in a trash can, and in the sinks in the kitchen and downstairs bathroom. Also on the door frames and the back door. Without wasting any time, investigators launched a homicide investigation. Now, in the original event report, neighbors reported uncharacteristic behaviors at the Prier home, leading up to the discovery of Leslie's murder. One neighbor told the police that the night before Leslie was found, he had viewed the Prier house and noted that every light in the house was on, but all of the drapes were closed, and he described this as unusual. Now, as we all know, the husband is almost always the first suspect, and just days after Leslie's murder, Sandy was interviewed and admitted that yes, his marriage was strained. He said, Leslie was an absolute love and a beauty when she didn't drink. She would have a lot, and in honesty, it's one of the reasons that I came home late sometimes, because it was getting hard to deal with. When they asked him about the evening before Leslie's death, he told investigators he had been running errands, to include stopping at the dump and visiting 3 different stores to find a battery charger. Detectives stated that they did find Sandy's behavior a little suspicious, like he was trying to create an alibi for himself. So in addition to the neighbor's suspicions and the revelation that the relationship had been strained, Sandy agreed to participate in a polygraph test, which he failed. However, we all know that polygraph tests are tricky and they don't really hold up in court. Polygraph tests are an indicator that the person is having a response in their body, a physical response to whatever questions are being asked of them. And I could see how this man failed, because this is a stressful situation and police think that he murdered his wife. So, I mean, they only ever ask you just a couple of questions. I could see how you could fail this. Anyway, investigators were trying to find a reason why Sandy was acting so suspiciously. Because of a lot of his movements, a lot of his reactions, this failed polygraph, they were all kind of mounting up to a probable cause. However, one crime scene to create a family tree of the killer. And when they ran his DNA collected from the bottle, it was a match. So on Tuesday, June 18th of 2024, the now 46-year-old Lauren received a phone call from the cold case detectives who had been working her mother's case. They told her that they had found a match in the DNA evidence, and when they told her the name of her mother's killer, all she could say was no. Lauren knew the name of the person that they'd given her. It was a name that she had spoken thousands of times over. The name of a person who had sat around the island bench in her kitchen, eating pasta that her mother had cooked. A name who had joined her family on beach holidays. A name who had sat down and played board games with her family. A name in which her mother had often spoken of fondly. The name Eugene Kilgore, and he was Lauren's high school boyfriend. Lauren and Eugene had both been students at the Bethesda Chevy Chase High School when she'd fallen head over heels for him at age 16. A handsome boy that she remembered as kind and warm. Eugene's parents had gone through a divorce and he'd struggled with this, but there were no outward signs of violence. The two of them had dated for 5 years, breaking it off after Lauren had finished her second year of university. She had been the one to instigate the split, but she said that he appeared to take it well, and the two of them lost contact with each other, moving on with their lives. And then, around 2 years later, Leslie is murdered. And chillingly enough, it wasn't long after Leslie's funeral that Lauren ran into Eugene in a bar. The first conversation that they'd had in years, and of course her mother's murder comes up. And Lauren says that Eugene responded with, "I'm so sorry." She said that he had never shown any outward signs of violence toward her, but her father, Sandy, had repeatedly warned her that he felt like something was off with him. However, her mother, Leslie, just loved him. So, Eugene is arrested, and he is charged with first-degree murder in connection to the 2001 killing of Leslie Breer. Now, for confirmation, detectives tested his DNA once again after his arrest. And although his DNA was recovered from multiple areas in the Breer household, the most critical piece of evidence was the DNA found under her fingernails. Less than a year later, in May of 2025, Eugene was being held without bond. Originally, he said that he had nothing to do with the murder, but when he was presented with the evidence, he then changed his tune and pled guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder. He was facing a maximum of 30 years in prison, and his sentencing took place 2 months ago in August of 2028. He actually took a plea deal, which meant that he didn't have to have a trial, and the prosecution presented several photos during his sentencing and pointed to multiple signs of a struggle. Circuit Judge David Lease told Eugene in court, "This was a personal crime. There was blood everywhere." Now, Eugene himself remained calm through the whole thing as prosecutors reminded the court of the horror that he had inflicted. Before he was sentenced, he took the stand and he extended Prosecutors dismissed this as self-serving and said, this is a crime without a motive that the defendant is willing to admit. But even now, he will not give the family the answer to the question that they've been waiting for 24 years. Why? Prosecutors told the court that Lauren was consumed with fear and anxiety after her mother's death. For months, she couldn't shower alone. She was traumatized of the knowledge of where her mother's body had been found, and even went out and bought clear shower curtains. To this day, Lauren and her best friend, whose name I don't have, check behind the shower curtains when they enter a new place. Unfortunately, Sandy Prier died in 2017 before he could know the identity of his wife's killer. He officially died from septic shock, but Lauren states that it was a broken heart that made him pass away. So this morning, before I started filming this for you, I just did a final search of this case because I always kind of do that just to make sure that there are no updates, because sometimes I start researching them months before I ever tell you about them. And I found out that 2 days ago, when you're seeing this, there was an episode of Dateline about this case, and they said at the end of it, well, they described Eugene as a zen person. He was mischievous with a history of substance abuse. Yeah. Lauren said he didn't seem weird when she ran into him at the bar after her mother's death. And she wondered, how could you look someone in the eye and know that you'd committed this crime and act like nothing had happened? So let's see, there was a section I wanted to read to you. Lauren has finally been given a sense of peace, knowing her father has finally been vindicated of any wrongdoing, even after his death. And she feels as though, hold on, I gotta pop up, get out of here, shoot. Thank you, oh for gosh sakes. She feels as though he can finally rest in peace with the knowledge that her mother's killer has been caught. Now, prosecutors recommended that Eugene get a maximum of 30 years, which the judge gave him, but the sentence was suspended to 22. Since he took the plea deal, he didn't stand trial and didn't have to offer a motive. He received his 22-year sentence and shortly after filed a motion requesting that his sentence be reduced. As of October of 2025, he is housed at the Maryland Correctional Training Center in Washington County, Maryland. So, I really, like I said, it's not a Halloween case, but this is one of those cases that is extremely creepy to me, okay? This is her daughter's high school boyfriend. They were together for 5 years. This man was in their house, at their dinner table, went on vacations with them. Supposedly, it was kind of an amicable breakup. From what I read, he didn't really cause any issues or anything like that. So, what was he doing at their house on that morning in May? I understand why Leslie would have let him in. There wasn't any hard feelings. There wasn't any sign of violence from this man, like towards her daughter or anything like that. But how did they get to the point where he murdered her? And, excuse my stomach, it's being disrespectful, I did have breakfast. How did he get to murdering her? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. He's 21 at the time. The only thing that I can think of is he had criminal intent in his mind when he went is, because you can't tell me that you didn't, with the blood splatter that was all over this house, basically. You were cognizant enough in your blackout state to try to hide her in the shower, and then try to clean up the scene so that maybe you wouldn't be discovered, but you clearly weren't cognizant enough of the fact that she somehow injured you enough to get her DNA, your DNA, under her fingernails and spattered around the house. So you had some kind of scratches or marks or injury upon your person that when you woke up from this blackout state, you didn't think, oh my god, what have I done? Clearly, there's no remorse here. I have to think that if there was some kind of remorse, you may have turned yourself in to authorities because you saw Lauren a couple months later. Oh goodness, heard about the whole thing and then didn't think, oh my god, I woke up that morning covered in blood with these scratches. Yeah, you're a creep. Notwithstanding any of your other criminal history, doesn't really seem like you got your ish together, if you ask me. Anyway,